A bit about myself. First, I live in Darwin on Larrakia country. I'm a Kororeg Aboriginal man. Kororeg are the islands closest to the mainland in the Torres Strait, and I can trace my ancestry back generations before Captain Cook sailed through there and landed on Possession Island and renamed it in that way. I am also Kokogal, which is the central island group in the Torres Strait, and Errabumlay, an Errab or Darnley Island is an island close to Mare in the up in the northeast of the Torres Strait, where Koiki Mabo came from. So that's who I am. I come to be before you today because I really believe in what we're doing here, and I have an understanding of that through my own experience. I was a wharfie, and people understand the importance of this in different ways, but I just want to share how I come to understand the great importance of this. I was a wharfie from when I was 17 years old in Darwin. For 16 years I worked on the wharf. I was there in 1998 when the Patrick's dispute happened. I was 20 years old when all that went down. And you know, on the wharf I got a real understanding of the value of unity, not just as something that you say in a forum like this or in a rally, but something that requires that structure, representation that you can choose and hold to account, the ability to come together as people, you know, with like minds to have debate and discussion, and then to reach consensus and go out with some coherency in unity. And I'm not going to give you an extensive list, but I'm going to give you enough, show you enough of statements and petitions that we've made to give you the pattern throughout history, the lessons that we've learned. In common for these statements and petitions is that they all called for a voice. Every one of them called for political representation. To go back to what I said earlier, it's natural, it's normal for large groups of people to set up a structure to speak coherently, to get, to speak to their interests. And so each of these statements and petitions were ignored by the King or the Federal Parliament or the Queen. And all of them, so they all called for a voice, and they're all dismissed and ignored. So this brings me to another pattern throughout history. We have established many voices before without waiting for governments to do so. Every time we establish a representative body under one government, it's changed or removed by the next, and you're starting over again. Also, ATSIC had problems, and people of a generation that were following politics in them days have certainly heard about those problems. But you didn't hear about the good things that ATSIC was doing. It was doing a lot of good work. And so, again, a tactic was to amplify its problems and not celebrate its wins. And this is important to consider. All organisations have problems from time to time. A union, a council, a business, a government, all organisations have problems. What do? You reform. You amend the rules or the constitution of the organisation. You close loopholes that are being exploited. If it's a democracy, as ATSIC was, then let democracy run its course and choose better leaders. If people are breaking the law, if there's corruption, then the law should deal with it. But you don't just get rid of an organisation. We wouldn't have a parliament if that was the case, right? So we have been led to believe, and I think a lot of Australians still believe this, and this is one of the challenges that we have, that these were all failures. That's not true. It was a failure of government to want to be held to account, to listen to Indigenous people. But things get worse when we don't have a voice. Those funding cuts that I talked about were too easy to do. We have seen the gap widen. With the gap widening in a crisis, 39 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders called for a meeting. The Prime Minister and the opposition leader, it was Abbott and Shorten at the time, and they said we need to do something. They said two things that are important to this moment. They said Firstly, when it comes to constitutional recognition, we support it, but we want more than symbolism. We want a form of recognition that is substantive, and the words used was that give us greater fairness. Secondly, they said that we understand meetings like this can happen and then nothing might follow. We seek for a referendum council to be established to be able to take the question from this meeting to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and the broader Australian public about what form of recognition we could accept. The Referendum Council was established with bipartisanship because there had been bipartisanship on constitutional recognition since Howard. The Referendum Council, 50% Indigenous and 50% non-Indigenous leaders designed this. Arnie Pat Anderson, who I mentioned earlier, was one of the co-chairs. And we went to a culminating convention in the heart of the nation at Uluru in late May 2017, and that is where the Uluru Statement was made. We had 3 more days of passionate discussion and debate, 270 of us. On the final morning, 250 of us endorsed it with standing acclamation and tears of joy and hope. It was hard work, but we did it. There were naysayers saying that we couldn't come up with a consensus. Indigenous people can't agree on these things. Well, we did it. The lessons that go into the Uluru Statement are these. Firstly, that if all those other statements and petitions have been dismissed and ignored by Parliament or kings and queens, then we address it to the Australian people as an invitation. Also, we need a voice, but we must learn from that pattern throughout history, put it out of the reach of hostile governments that always come along, so that we can guarantee that we're going to have a say, and that the only way you can do that is in the Constitution, the rule book of the nation. The Australian people can put it there, the Parliament can't take it away. What is the Constitution? It defines the powers of our government. It's an agreement made, in the late negotiations in the late 19th century, established in 1901 between the colonies that became the states of our new federation. It included clauses that enabled Indigenous people to be specifically excluded. But one of the pieces of misinformation that is put out there by the No campaign is that 1967 removed race from our constitution and now we're all equal. Well, that's false. Race power is still in there and it's been used since 67 only to make special laws about Indigenous people, and it can be to our detriment. So what we are voting on is yes or no to this. Should we recognise Indigenous people for their 60,000 years of history and culture, to share in that, to be unique in the world in that regard, by giving them a say about matters that relate to them? Not a right to veto, not a third chamber in Parliament, representations. Parliament decides how. The matter of detail is one that has been used to try to confuse Australians. As I talked about, that's what we're voting on. The principle is another way to describe it. The principle if we should recognise and listen to Indigenous people. And we elect parliamentarians and hold them to account to make decisions on those details, because if it was in the Constitution, we'd have to have a referendum, all the time. But we give these design principles. We negotiated this. I was part of the 20 Indigenous people that negotiated it with the government, with eminent constitutional experts advising us, like Professor Anne Toomey, Professor George Williams, former Chief High Court Justice Robert French, Kenneth Hayne, Professor Megan Davis, Noel Pearson, Asmi Wood, I think his last name. Anyway, the design principles are these. This is just some of them. There's others. I encourage you to look them up. The voice will give independent advice. The voice will be accountable and transparent. It'll work alongside existing organisations and traditional structures. It won't have a program delivery function like ATSIC did. We've got ARCHOs now, Aboriginal controlled service delivery happening. So this is purely about influencing policies and laws and improving those and working with those existing organisations. It'll be chosen by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people based on the wishes of local communities, representative of our communities, Gender balance and youth will be involved, and it won't have a veto power. Okay? These are part of the introduction of the alteration bill, so they have some legal standing. When the referendum passes, what happens next is the government will go and have consultations, run a process with Indigenous communities about those final details, how many, how they're elected, all those sorts of things. Then they will take it to the Parliament, and then the opposition and the crossbenchers and all the rest, they're going to have their big debate and they'll settle on something. So another reason why we don't say 24 representatives or whatever we want to say before the referendum is because that's not certain. Parliament needs to debate those things. Who knows how that is going to play out? Another commonly asked question is, why don't all Indigenous people support this? That's because we're not homogenous. You know, we're human. If we would, as I said before, if we were to wait for 100%, you'd never do anything. And we should respect those diverse perspectives and use our own common sense. And remember these two things. The Uluru Statement was the most well-informed. It was a unique process in how well-resourced and Indigenous-led it was. The formulation of it was very important. And so I believe if we were to run that process again with 10 times as much resources, with 10 times as many Indigenous people involved, because you're never going to get 800,000 people involved in one process, we would get the same result. Even Indigenous people that are against this, if you really listen to them, they're giving you plenty of reasons to say yes to this. Okay? This is the campaign, Yes 23. There's also a kitchen tables campaign, conversations. I would love for you to hopefully be invigorated for this. Looks like I've put people to sleep, but hopefully be invigorated from this, that you will sign up as a volunteer and do everything you can in this very short amount of time till the referendum to help us to win. Thank you.